In this merciless desert where water had disappeared like a distant memory, the tribe of Ongobondo fought for survival. Every day was a trial, a silent battle against the desert stretching as far as the eye could see. The once fertile lands were now barren, reduced to deep, dark cracks that seemed to swallow all life. For Ongobondo, an 8-year-old boy, thirst and hunger were no longer fleeting sensations, but constant companions, a mute pain marking his childhood. At only 8, Ongobondo understood suffering. He saw it in his mother's eyes, once sparkling, now clouded by sorrow and exhaustion. She tried to smile for him, to give him a semblance of comfort, but even her smile seemed as rare and parched as the water itself. He saw the same pain in the slow, tired movements of the elders, those who had known a time when rivers and lakes nourished their land. Now they sat around the fire, telling old legends, stories of trees with lush green leaves and abundant rains, as if these tales could bring a little coolness to the oppressive desert heat. The other children, once his playmates, remained silent, their energy stolen by the relentless heat. They had become shadows of their former selves, their laughter gone like the wind in the sand. Ongobondo felt alone, so terribly alone, but despite everything, something within him refused to give up. His once vibrant curiosity, which led him to ask 1,000 questions about plants, animals, and the stars in the sky, had been extinguished under the weight of despair. But deep inside him, a persistent whisper remained, fragile as a spark that refuses to die out, a whisper telling him not to give up, to seek, to hope still. This whisper, which he dared not share with anyone, became his secret. Sometimes, he imagined it was the voice of the earth itself, this devastated and dry land calling to him, speaking of an ancient promise, of life hidden deep within its cracked soil. He didn't know where this certainty came from, but it grew stronger in him every day. He found himself staring at the cracks in the ground as though searching for a sign, a message, something that would tell him that all was not lost. At night, lying in his little hut, he silently gazed at the stars. Through the holes in the straw roof, he saw them shining, distant and mysterious. The elders said that each star was the soul of an ancestor watching over them. So, Ongobondo secretly sent his thoughts to the stars, hoping that an ancestor would hear him and whisper a miracle. One morning, when the sun was fiercer than usual, Ongobondo rose, staggering, consumed by a thirst that burned him from within. His throat, as dry as the cracked earth beneath his feet, made him feel as if a stone had lodged there, weighing heavily every time he tried to swallow. The camp around him was silent, immersed in a state of overwhelming torpor, and he sensed, as he watched the silent shadows of his people, that even the air was exhausted. The faces of the villagers, hollowed by hunger, despair, and dehydration, were marked by a deep emptiness, as if all life had slowly left them. Ongobondo knew his own end was approaching if he didn't find water, yet a force stronger than him bubbled silently in his chest. It was a visceral, inexplicable determination, like a stubborn flame refusing to die out. This force kept him from being swept away by the resignation that was overtaking his people. He refused to give up, even though every step felt like an insurmountable challenge. Taking an old, worn gourd and a walking stick, Ongobondo cast one last glance at his mother. She rested under a makeshift shelter, a simple piece of faded cloth stretched between two sticks, her eyes closed to escape the suffering and despair. Her skin was marked by days without water, by weakness, but he could tell that even in her dreams, she found no relief. He felt a bitter heat rise in his throat, but he held back his tears, knowing that crying would be a betrayal to those who secretly hoped that he would succeed where all had failed. With a slow step, he left the camp, his feet leaving shallow imprints in the dust. Behind him, the gaze of his people followed him in silence, without a word, as if they had already mourned his life. This departure was not just his own. He carried with him the last breath of hope from the tribe, which had, for too long, waited in vain for the rains to return. No one tried to stop him, for they knew, in a corner of their minds, that the search for water was a dream extinguished, a chimera that even the bravest no longer dared to pursue. The sun rose in the sky, relentless, and every step of Ongobondo was a silent promise made to those he left behind, to return, with or without water, but with the certainty that he had tried everything, that he had not abandoned his family to the open arms of death. For interminable hours, Ongobondo walked, alone under a merciless sky. The sun, unyielding, cast its scorching rays on the cracked and dusty ground, turning the landscape into a shimmering sea of mirages where the air itself seemed to waver under the heat. Each step sank into the arid land, as if the heat were trying to anchor his feet to the ground, but he refused to give in, carving his path through this ocean of desolation. The burning ground bit the bare skin of his feet, but he didn't slow down. With each moment, the pain increased, like burning needles running up his legs, but he forced his mind to ignore the torment. His lips, dry and cracked, stuck together what he tried to swallow, without a drop of moisture to soothe the consuming thirst that devoured him. His throat was a scorched furnace, and every breath became a strained rasp, as if the air had become too heavy for his lungs. As he moved forward, time stretched cruelly, each minute turning into an eternity. He no longer had a sense of the hours passing, only the weight of each second pressing down on him, each step becoming an immense effort. The landscape, barren and pitiless, seemed to stretch endlessly, a hopeless horizon punctuated only by mirages that danced in the distance, deceiving his tired eyes with visions of rivers and lakes that did not exist. His breathing became erratic, almost a panting whisper. His thoughts floated, fading, reforming in a confused ballet where determination fought against exhaustion. He felt himself slipping, as if the sand beneath his feet was ready to swallow him whole, but he gripped the stick in his hand with the desperate strength of a man teetering on the edge of a precipice. He had to keep moving. A single thought kept him alive. Somewhere, at the end of this burning desert, there might still be a source, a hope for him and for his people. Each additional step was a vow, a promise he made to himself in silence. He would not die here, abandoned to this barren land. With every step forward, his thoughts turned to those he had left behind, weakened but full of hope for his return. He remembered the faces of the children, their innocent gazes despite the suffering, the calloused hands of the elders still trying to draw from the meager water reserves, and especially the tired face of his mother, who, despite her resignation, had not lost that spark of hope in her eyes. This memory gave him the strength to move forward, even when his legs threatened to give way under the weight of exhaustion. At times, he would close his eyes to imagine himself elsewhere, in a place where water flowed abundantly, where the earth was green, and the streams murmured beneath the cool shade of trees. He saw himself plunging his hands into crystal-clear water, tasting the sweetness of every drop. This illusory vision renewed his strength, offering him a temporary escape from the harshness of the desert. But soon, reality would take over again, relentless. The desert, unwavering, seemed to mock him, stretching endlessly, each hill he climbed revealing a new expanse, even drier and more desolate than the last. Sometimes, he would stagger, feeling his body weaken under the invisible weight of abandonment. His feet, bruised and covered in sores, stumbled over the rocks, and every fall became a painful reminder of his own vulnerability. However, even on the ground, Ongobondo refused to be overwhelmed by despair. He would rise, slowly, pushing himself up with the little strength he had left, and place one foot in front of the other, repeating the promise he had made in a hoarse breath. This promise was all he had left, a fragile thread that connected him to life. This invisible bond with his tribe, with his loved ones waiting for his return, kindled in him a tiny but intense flame, a spark of humanity in a world that seemed bent on extinguishing it. When he reached a dried-out tree, solitary in the middle of the endless desert, he finally stopped, breathless and his legs wobbling. Ongobondo placed a trembling hand on the rough trunk, seeking a little respite in the meager shade the tree offered. This old tree, with its bare and twisted branches, seemed to be the last witness of an ancient world, forgotten by time and scorched by the relentless sun. He looked up, contemplating this skeletal plant standing against the vast aridness, like the last hope of life in this kingdom of dust. The heat shimmered in front of him, turning the horizon into a dancing mirage, and in this moment of disorientation, his thoughts took him back to the stories of the elders. Sitting around the nighttime fire, the village elders would tell tales of a bygone time, when valleys were covered in greenery and rivers sprang from rocks with an abundance his generation had never known. They spoke of great herds of antelopes and colorful birds that came to drink at the waterholes, of streams so clear you could see every stone, every fish hiding within. Ongobondo, as a child, had listened to these stories as one listens to legends, with curious but distant wonder, never imagining that this age of abundance had truly existed. Today, however, those stories resonated differently, awakening in him a poignant nostalgia for a paradise he had never known but felt deeply embedded in him. His ancestors had lived on these fertile lands, they had drunk from the rivers, they had run across verdant meadows, and watched the sky without fear of drought. These images, once vague and blurry, suddenly became vivid in his mind, an intense vision that allowed him to escape, if only for a moment, from the harshness of the desert surrounding him. He closed his eyes, letting these images fill his mind, imagining the singing rivers, the leafy trees offering generous shade, the feeling of cool water flowing between his fingers, quenching his burning thirst. He could almost smell the scent of damp herbs and hear the rustling of leaves swayed by the wind. This world from the past, so alive in his childhood memories, seemed to speak to him through the silence of the desert. Perhaps it was a sign, he thought, a promise that life could still be reborn from these barren lands. The dried-out tree, though frail, became a symbol for Ongobondo, a reminder of life's resilience in the face of trials. In this twisted trunk, he saw the strength of his people, the perseverance of past generations who had survived the whims of nature, the droughts, and had found ways to adapt. This solitary tree, like him, struggled to exist, to withstand the flames of the sun. And in this shared solitude, he found a semblance of comfort, as if the tree whispered to him that he was not alone, that within him burned the strength of all the deep roots of his land. Opening his eyes, Ongobondo inhaled deeply, rising with renewed determination. The desert still stretched before him, vast and intimidating, but he now knew that it was not merely a place of death and desolation. Beneath this sterile appearance, there was life hidden, a promise of renewal. An inexplicable feeling awakened within him, a force from somewhere else, as if the spirits of the earth and sky were whispering to him to continue. It was like an ancestral impulse, a deep pulse that ran through his veins and awakened in him an unexpected will. The world seemed to stop around him, and, in the midst of this sacred silence, he straightened, his eyes shining with newfound determination. This moment, this revelation, made him feel connected to something much greater than himself, a vibrant call from the ancestors who had walked these same lands. Without thinking any longer, he began to dig frantically into the soil, his breath becoming a litany, rhythmically tied to the effort. Every movement was a silent prayer. Each punch of his fist into the hard earth echoed as a tribute to those who had struggled before him. The landscape around him, once barren and hostile, began to transform. The cracks in the earth, barely visible, seemed to come alive under the pulse of his effort, as though the earth itself was responding to his desperate call. He had neither a shovel nor a sharp tool, only his trembling, wounded hands, and his hope as fragile as a flickering flame in a cruel wind. The pain in his hands had become a familiar companion, but today it was carried by a fervor that transcended all suffering. He knew that every moment was precious, that every second counted, as if the earth itself demanded this desperate act from him. His determination was fueled by the certainty that water, this vital gift, was not just a material need, but a promise for the future. With each strike, he felt the earth resist, impenetrable, dry, and hard, his fingers encountering stone's roots, but he did not stop. He was now in a trance, guided by a force pushing him beyond his limits. The stones, these obstacles that could have discouraged him, became witnesses to his determination. He was fighting against a natural indifference, but deep in his heart, he knew he was not alone. The murmurs of his ancestors encouraged him, their voices resonating in the beats of his heart, telling him he was the guardian of their legacy. The ground seemed to challenge him, but this only increased his determination because he was digging for more than just a material need. He was digging to honor something more vast and ancient, an invisible force that transcended him. He could almost feel the spirits of his ancestors around him, encouraging him to draw from the courage buried deep within him. Every movement he made, every drop of sweat beading on his brow, was a declaration of his will, a promise to never give up. As he continued to dig, a smell of damp earth began to rise, sweet and almost mystical, like a glimmer of hope piercing through the veil of desolation. For Ongobondo, this scent was a promise, a sign that his quest, however desperate it had seemed, was not in vain. Trembling with excitement, he crouched lower, his hands plunged into the fresh earth, feeling every grain roll under his fingers. This contact with the earth was an unparalleled feeling, a deep connection with the nurturing soil, as if, in that moment, he was touching the very essence of life. He felt in communion with both the past and the future, the voices of the elders whispering in his mind, infusing him with new strength. As his hands dug deeper, he suddenly heard a dull sound resonating beneath the surface, like a heartbeat hidden in the bowels of the earth. It was a primal, powerful sound that made him vibrate to his soul. He immediately understood that he was touching something precious, something that words could not even describe. It was not simply water he had found there, but a sacred bond with the earth that had nourished and protected him, a promise his ancestors had kept in reserve for a moment of ultimate despair. In one final burst, carried by hope and wonder, Ongobondo dug even deeper, each movement becoming a prayer, a thank you to the spirits who had guided him this far. His heart raced, a symphony echoing the pulse of life surrounding him. Then, as if the earth had finally yielded to his unwavering determination, a thin stream of water shot up, splashing his face with a life-saving rain. It was a spring, a tiny spring of fresh water, hidden for generations beneath the hard, arid earth, like a buried treasure that the earth, in a final act of grace, had decided to reveal. Ongobondo discovered it almost by chance, at the turn of his exhausted steps. He stood silent in awe, his eyes moist with emotion, his cheeks marked by dust and the tears of relief that flowed freely. For a moment, he remained kneeling, in a kind of silent prayer before this liquid miracle, aware of the rarity of this gift. A presence seemed to manifest around him, intangible but palpable, as if the spirits of the ancestors were standing there, invisible but benevolent, witnesses to this unique moment. The drops fell gently, and each one seemed to carry with it a memory, a prayer whispered by those who, before him, had hoped so much, suffered so much under this relentless sun. Each drop sparkled under the sun's rays like a precious pearl, and he carefully filled his gourd with infinite caution, his hands trembling with emotion. He approached the vessel with respect, as if it were a sacred ritual, allowing the liquid to pour in with a calculated softness and slowness, making sure not to lose a single drop. The liquid slid into the hollow of the gourd with an almost magical fluidity, each drop falling like a promise, each sound resonating like a melody of hope. When he finally rose, the weight of the gourd in his hands was not only the weight of the water, it was the weight of the history of his people, their struggles, and their resilience. It was the weight of an uncertain but possible future, made tangible by this unexpected miracle. What he held in his hands was not just a simple vessel filled with water, it was a symbol of survival, a talisman of hope for his people. In that moment, the fatigue, the weariness, and the pain that had haunted him throughout his quest evaporated. He felt a new energy infusing every fiber of his being, as if life itself, through this liquid, was flowing into him, inviting him to believe again. On the way back, Every step he took was guided by this new light, and he felt within him a renewed promise. The hot desert wind no longer seemed as relentless. It caressed his face like a soft breath of encouragement, soothing his past worries and pains. Even the sun, high in the sky, now appeared as an ally, lighting his path with 1,000 brilliant reflections in the precious water that filled his gourd. In his heart, a thought emerged, simple but powerful. Perhaps this desert was not only a place of deprivation and suffering, but also a place of rebirth, a place where hope and strength were born from the greatest of despairs. This arduous path, full of challenges, was in fact a metaphor for life itself, a school of resilience. When he finally glimpsed the first homes of his village, a wave of emotion overwhelmed him. The members of the tribe, gaunt and exhausted, had watched his departure with resignation, their faces marked by fatigue and disillusionment. But now, seeing him return, gourd in hand, with a gleam of determination in his eyes, they felt something new, a glimmer of hope in their hearts. Ongobondo, the little 8-year-old boy, had become their hero, their messenger of hope. Silently, the villagers gathered around him, forming a circle, their eyes shining with hope and wonder. They could almost feel the vibrant energy emanating from him, a promise of a better future. Ongobondo raised the gourd, showing it to everyone, and in a whisper filled with emotion, he declared that the earth had not yet finished nourishing them. It was a silent but powerful promise that, as long as they had faith in themselves and in the earth that supported them, they would find the strength to overcome the hardest trials. The villagers moved, exchanged looks full of understanding. They knew this was not just a simple discovery, but the beginning of a path toward redemption. A woman, Ongobando's mother, approached, tears in her eyes, her heart overflowing with pride and relief. She took her son in her arms, holding him close as if never wanting to let him go again. The other villagers gathered around, sharing this moment of deep connection, of collective gratitude. They realized that, despite the harshness of the desert, a glimmer of hope could arise from their struggles. Ongobondo, still standing, looked at his fellow villagers, his eyes shining with determination. He spoke of the spring he had found, not merely as a water source, but as a symbol of their collective strength. He invited them to come together to build a water collection system, to preserve this precious resource, and ensure that no member of the tribe would ever again suffer from thirst. His words resonated like an ancient song, awakening in each of them a desire to fight for their future. Together, they could transform their despair into action, and that gourd, filled with water, would become the starting point of a new era for their village. Together, they decided to organize a ceremony to celebrate this new life, this rebirth. Ongobondo knew this was just the beginning. He had discovered not only a water source, but a source of hope for his people. With the strength of their unity and their faith, they would prove that, even in the darkest moments, light could always pierce through the clouds of desolation.